Welcome to my YouTube channel, especially to Political Thinkers series. And in this video, we're going to discuss a brief biography of Plato, his theory of ideal state, and the decay of ideal state, and criticisms against Plato's ideal state. So, without wasting our time, let us begin. Plato's early adulthood coincided with the Peloponnesian War from 431 BCE to 404 BCE, which resulted in the defeat of Athens. The democratic constitution of Pericles was abolished. A council consisting of 30 oligarchs established. But Plato, who did not believe in the democratic constitution, strongly believed that this council of oligarchs will successfully reconstruct the society. But his dream soon vanished, especially in the behavior of Plato's uncle Critias. According to all accounts, he was a brutal politician. These 30 tyrants adopted unpopular governance, which led to alienation of rich Athenians who initially favored their rule. Soon under the leadership of Thrasybulus, a counter-revolutionary movement defeated 30 oligarchs and established democracy. It was under this new government Plato's beloved friend and teacher Socrates perished. He was condemned for several reasons, especially his association with oligarchs. But all these events led Plato to take a decision to leave his city. Failure of oligarchy and his beloved teacher's condition under democracy gave an impression to him that all forms of government is bad until a philosopher become a king, or a king himself become philosopher. Citizens' trouble will not end. In fact, Plato had an ambition to develop his political career at Athens, but the tragic death of Socrates compelled him to choose philosophy as his profession. Plato published 36 dialogues and 3 books. Name of his first book is The Republic, which is published in the year 386 BCE. This is the most important work of Plato, which is described as his masterpiece. In this we find Plato's views on ideal state, justice, communism and education. Second book is Statesman, which deals with the classification of state. Plato writes in his book that states are 2 types. First type is law-abiding state, that are monarchy, aristocracy and moderate democracy. And the second category is lawless states, that includes tyranny, oligarchy and extreme democracy. Plato's third book, published in the year 347 BCE, titled The Laws. Something peculiar about this book is that this book is published after the death of Plato. In this book, Plato constructs the state according to law, which is his second preferred state. Plato traveled extensively and returned to Athens. In 387 BCE, he established academy. The objective of academy was to train men for a life of statesmanship. It was intended to convert a tyrant king into a wise and just ruler. He always preferred the rule of wisest and the best. According to records, academy was the center where the advanced Greek learning took place and the future leaders were given political training. It was the first universities of ancient world and described as the best among the Western universities. Plato's views on ideal state, justice, communism and education has been written in his masterpiece The Republic. Plato argued that individual human beings are not self-sufficient. They cannot work alone to get all the necessities of life. In order to resolve these difficulties, they came together into communities for the mutual achievement of common goals. In his book, The Republic, he examined the relationship between individual and state. He said that state is highest manifestation of human virtue. There is a close affinity between the individual and the state. As Plato remarks, state does not come out of an oak or a rock, but from the character of men dwelling therein. And this formed the foundation of his theory of the state. Plato felt that the separation of functions and specialization of labor are necessary to constitute a worthwhile society and the state. According to Plato, an ideal state is not a state without classes or so-called castes. Instead, an ideal state should consist of 3 classes. That is, a philosopher king, a soldier and common people. All 3 classes were expected to perform proper functions for the working of the society. He felt that these 3 classes should possess certain qualities or virtue. The philosopher king must have virtue of wisdom, the capacity to comprehend reality and make impartial judgment about it, because they are responsible for making decisions according to which the entire city will be governed. The philosopher king called men of gold. Soldiers, on the other hand, need to have the virtue of courage, the willingness to carry out the ruler's orders in the face of danger without regard for the personal risk, because they are charged with the defense of the city against the external as well as internal enemies. They are called the men of silver. The rest of the people in the city must follow its leader instead of pursuing their private interests, so that they exhibit the virtue of moderation, the subordination of personal desires to the highest purpose. They are men of iron and brasses. Plato gives a different picture or a different idea about justice. He says justice is not the responsibility of any one class of citizen. When all three classes, that is king, soldier and common people, perform their own role appropriately and try not to take over the functions of any other class, the entire city will be operating with the harmony and justice. Plato believed that people also show the same features and perform same functions and embody the same virtue that city-states do. Plato says, just like people have physical bodies, states have land, building, etc. According to Plato, human beings have three souls, that is rational soul, spirited soul and finally appetitive soul. Rational soul is a mind or intellect, is the thinking portion within each of us, which understand what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is false, makes a rational decision in accordance with which the human life is properly lived. Spirited soul, on the other hand, is the active portion. Its function is to carry out the dictates of reason in practical life, courageously doing whatever the intellect has determined to be the best. Finally, the appetitive soul, that is emotion or desire, is the portion that wants and feels many things, most of which must be deferred in the face of rational pursuits. Plato says when these three souls in the human beings is properly performed, human being will be the ideal and happy. Just like an happy man or an ideal person, for a state to become ideal state or a happy state, it also needs three classes, that is philosopher king, who can be compared to rational soul, and second one is the soldier, who can be compared to the spirited soul, and third one is the general public, who can be compared to the appetitive soul. According to Plato, two guardians, that is philosopher king and soldiers, must get proper education. His plan for the elementary education of guardians appeared in Book 3. Its central concern is an emphasis on achieving the balance of many disparate components, that is physical training and musical performance, along with the basic intellectual development. For Plato, it was vital for a society to exercise a strict control over the content, everything that children read and heard. Their performance in the education should determine as to whether they can become guardian or not. So appropriate training should be provided to uphold the appropriate skills of individuals. The peculiar thing in the Plato's ideal state is communism of wives and property. According to Plato, the guardians, that is philosopher king and soldiers, should not allowed to marry, because Plato wanted them free from the cares of family and private property. They should devote themselves for the acquisition of knowledge and affairs of the state. But working class was allowed to marry and they can have private property and family life. But children should be brought up by the state. Plato did not appreciate a democratic state. He stated that the happiness of all was more important than that of part, and the happiness of the state was more important than that of three classes. However, we cannot compare his state to the totalitarian states of 20th century. To Plato, the purpose of the state is the protection of noble character, and the greatness of the state is to be measured by the personal worth of their citizens. Thus, Plato designs a unique kind of state in which there is a rule of a philosopher king, who would be the friend, the philosopher, and the guide, known and trained to have great wisdom. In such a state, training or education is given to everyone as per their aptitude, so that there is functional representation followed by unity and harmony. In Book 8 of the Republic, Plato examines the chances of the decay of the ideal state by examining imperfect states. According to Plato, ideal state is called as aristocracy. The principle of this state is the reason of the philosopher king. The danger in this state is that the guardian parents, that is warriors and the philosopher king, may not want to give up their children to the state. Thus they cease to be respected by the commoners. An ideal state, that is aristocracy, may taken over by the warriors, and that will be called as timocracy. According to Plato, timocracy is the second danger to ideal state. The principle of this state is the spirit of the warriors. This kind of state actually existed in Sparta in Plato's day, and also in medieval Europe or Japan or among Kshatriya castes in India. It was a kind of feudal military society. This kind of state will decay when the children of warriors falls to the temptations to use their military power to obtain wealth. Third danger for an ideal state is oligarchy or plutocracy, wherein the children of the soldiers or guardians who were not taken over by the state will try to acquire property. Plato calls it as oligarchy, the rule of the few, or the plutocracy, the rule of the wealth. Principle of this state is desire of rich. This state will decay when the children of the rich decide simply to enjoy themselves and dissipate their wealth, or when the poor decide to take advantage of their numbers by overthrowing the rich. When poor overthrow the rich, they will establish democracy. According to Plato, then that will be the fourth danger for an ideal state. What he meant by democracy is nothing but a system in which there is no government. People govern themselves without law. Principle of this state is desire. Since there is no law and principle is desire, people's desire for limited resource will create conflict. Series of conflict by the people to get limited resource will end up in developing a new desire by the peace-loving people, that is to get law and order. And finally, a tyrant will succeed in bringing about law and order. Then he will establish his rule, and that is tyranny. And according to Plato, that will be the fifth danger for an ideal state. The principle of this state is desire, but not the desire of all, but the desire of tyrant himself. Even though this process had not occurred in Greek history, it has taken place in Italy when Mussolini came to power, and in Germany when Hitler came to power. The tyrannical state is the most unhappy kind of state, as tyrant is subjected to unlimited desire which can never be met or satisfied with anything he has. At the end of the Republic, Plato gives an answer for a question that why it is better to act justly than unjustly. The answer in short is that acting unjustly harms one's own soul, and acting justly nourishes it. Now let us look at the criticism against Plato's ideal state. According to the critics, Plato's ideal state is eternal and static, but it is proven from the history that change is inevitable and resistant to change is total madness. In fact, his ideal state is something that is an outcome of an academic writing and not from any historical facts. Even some critics says that his ideal state is the grandfather of fascism, which also emphasized on elite leadership, spirited warriors and commoners, etc. All this system of stratification of society into three classes was against to the principle of equality. According to others, Plato's concept of communism of wives and property and temporary marriage goes against the spirit of human nature and society. According to sociologists, marriage as a permanent social institution strengthens the society and the state. Moreover, as Aristotle himself said, a system of common wives and children, which is only for two classes, would divide the people into legitimate and illegitimate lots. Different types of education for different classes in the ideal state would create the breed of educated and uneducated classes. Plato's idea of a philosopher king is more idealistic than realistic. In fact, it is difficult to find and also to create such a philosopher king. Elaborate education will not create such leaders. There is examples in history of great leaders without education. A ruler should be a man of action and not a man of philosophy. Treating children as the children of state may cool idea, but depriving them the parental love and personal care of own parents may have strong psychological impact on both children as well as the parents. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you really like the video, give me a thumbs up, and if you have any suggestions, put it in the comment section, and subscribe to my channel. If you want to get notifications, click on the bell icon. Thank you.